Okay, in this lesson we are going to talk about what's called error first callback functions. Let's start with an example, a simple example of creating a function called add. If we want to add two numbers together, we can pass in two parameters, and then we can simply return x plus y. And then we can simply call this function with two values. And we can just say console.log and log that answer out. Now we would expect 5 plus 6 to be 11. Sure enough, it is. Okay, simple example. Now let's suggest that there's going to be certain circumstances where I would call, let's say, this function with a negative number. And let's pretend that's actually an error condition. And so this particular function isn't very smart, and so it's just going to do the addition. Okay? I have no way to communicate with this function here back to the calling party that there is a problem with the data they have passed in. Okay? Let's say that passing in a -1 is an invalid state, and that the add function needs to communicate back that that's a problem. So let's change the name of our function to strict add, and what we're going to do is we can use a callback function to handle this. So I'm going to pass in a third parameter, and this third parameter is going to be a callback function. So the name of that parameter is, we're just going to call it callback. Okay. So then what I can do is in add I can start testing the values that are passed in. For example, I can say if x is less than 0, then I can say I'm going to say callback. I'm going to leave this I'm going to leave this kind of open right there for now. That's not complete. Also, we're going to say if y is less than 0, we're going to call our callback. And then otherwise, we're going to call the callback and return the result. So I've left these callback functions unfinished here because there's something that's important about these. With these callback functions, the standard is the first parameter in these callbacks is the error object. Okay? So when I call this function, I can say, in this case, I'm going to say x cannot be less than 0, for example. The second parameter is going to be null because I'm not going to return an answer. I have no answer for them. In this particular case, it's going to be y cannot be less than 0. And I'm not going to return an answer for that one either. So what I'm saying is the first parameter of this callback function that isn't even created yet is going to be the error message. The second parameter is going to be the result. In both these two cases, I don't have the result. So I'm not going to give them a result because they've passed me in invalid data. So on the third one, there is no error, so I'm going to say null, and then I'm going to give them the result, which is x plus y. So now this is a more intelligent function that takes a callback function as the third parameter. The first two parameters are the same, x and y. The third parameter is the callback function, which is used to communicate in an asynchronous fashion back information about was this successful, were there errors, and so on. So now let's call strict add. And so first parameter is x, so let's just say I'm going to pass in a 4. The next parameter is a y, which is another number that I want to add. Let's say call 8. Third parameter is the callback function. So what we do is we proceed to define the callback function. Now, the callback function has to follow a very specific pattern. The first parameter of the callback function has to be the error object. Okay? So, we're just going to use a variable called ERR. We expect that if if there's an error, that it will get passed in there. The second parameter we'll just say is the result. Okay, and that result there may be no result if there's an error. So then what we can do is we can test to see if there's an error. So we say if error. If there is an error, let's just display the error. Excuse me, that's not. Let's just display the error message. If there is no error, let's just display the answer. Like so. So now we pass it in a forward, an 8, and a callback function. The most important thing about the callback function is the error first. The first parameter of the callback function is the error object. If the error object is null, or there is no object, that means there was no error. And indeed, that's what I've accomplished up here. Let's try the answer. Let's see what happens here. Oops, I've got a problem here. What did I do wrong? I'm not seeing it here. Oh, I need an F. Excuse me, did that wrong. Okay, so indeed I got 12. So I pass in a 4 and an 8. If I pass in a 4 and 8, 4 is certainly is not less than 0, and 8 is not less than 0. So it returned an x plus y, which is a 12, and then the error object was null. Okay, so let's change this now to where this is a negative 4. So indeed, I got a message that says x cannot be less than 0. Okay, so you can see how this error first callback function works. I'm going to show you a real life example here. I have a file here called app.js. We're going to create a variable called fs and require fs, which is kind of a file system library. It's a library where we can call functions to read text files and so on. So in this particular file, I declare, okay, I need to bring in the fs library, assign it to a variable called fs. I can then do fs.readFile, and here you see the callback function being used here. The first parameter is the name of the file that we want to read, and so let's say we want to find a file called test.xyz, and we want to read that file. This function will do that for us. So it's a powerful function, but it does take a callback function just in case there's errors. And the callback function the first parameter of that callback function is the error, and the second is the data. So let's say, for example, that test.xyz did not exist. What we would expect is that the error function, the error object would have something. It definitely wouldn't be null, and there would be no data because it couldn't find this file. If it could find this file, then the error would be null and the data would be there. The data containing the file would be there. And so, sure enough, if you see, we write some code. If error, that means if there's an error, let's go ahead and display that error. If there is no error, let's display the data. And so in this case, let's see what happens here. And I'm going to clear my display here. So you can see that in this case there's definitely an error. And this is the error object. It passed back an error object to me. Okay? And what's interesting is it's an object, not just a string. And so, for example, I could get more information about this. I say, what exactly is the problem? You can see it's passing back some JSON to me, and there's a property in the JSON called path. So I'm just going to, I want to know what the path is. I don't want all this, the whole thing here. So let's try this. And so you can see that it returned the path to me. That's pretty cool. And then, so in this particular case, there was definitely an error, and I'm gonna just do one little thing here to fix this up just a little bit. And let's just see here. I think that will get rid of that undefined for us, sure enough. Now, let's make it, see, this file does not exist. I created a file called test.txt. This file does exist. Let's see what happens when I do this. And sure enough, I actually get this is the buffer. This is an array of actual values representing that text file. Okay, so in this case, I call a function called readFile. ReadFile expects a callback function as the second parameter. The first parameter is the name of the file that you want to read. The second parameter is the callback function. That callback function, it expects the error object to be in the first position and the result to be in the second position. And therefore, I can test to see if this function found a file or not. And if it did find a file, I can display that file. If it didn't, I can display the error and kind of move on from there.